So, what are we doing here today? A few months ago, Dave and I were at the pub, and the conversation came up of, oh, we should do an ADC talk. Oh, you know, we really should. And then it's like, oh, that's a lot of work, isn't it? You know, preparing all the slides. And so we thought, oh, but we don't want to not do something. And famously in the UK, there's an old Radio 4 show that started in the 70s, I think, which is a comedy panel game. And the reason it's a panel game is because the BBC approached one of a comedian, Graham Garden, said, like, will you write us a weekly half-hour comedy show? And he was like, well, that's a lot of effort. So what I'm going to do is just invite some people to come and be funny every week, and I can just turn up and get on with it. So that's what we're trying to do today. So we thought, what can we get a bunch of people to sit and be funny about? And we figured it's the same kind of questions that come up at the pub when you're with some developers and you're geeking out a bit, and you're arguing about something that really doesn't matter at all, and there's no real answer to it, but it's kind of fun to debate. So Dave has prepared us.
So here's how it's hopefully going to work. We have a bunch of topics, and we're going to poll them. So we're going to talk about whatever is voted highest. So hopefully, I don't know, your head might be in the way now. If you can look at that QR code.
Stare into the QR code.
I'm dizzy already. I am the internet.
Channel it, Ben.
No, it's just too hateful.
While that's happening, perhaps we could introduce the panelists, and then we can get going. So, well, Jules, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, and moving on.
I'm Pete Goodliff. I'm VP of software for In Music, which is Akai, Oasis, Newmark, M Audio, a whole load of other really cool audio brands. And yeah, fun to be here.
And Pete is also gobby and opinionated. That quote, I'm quoting him there, which is why we thought he'd be good fun today.
I'm Ben Supper, representing the hardware paramilitary wing of this set of arguments. I have worked at Focusrite for a few years and Rowland for a few years and a number of other places, and now I consider myself full-time unemployable.
And Ben's sort of representing the C hardware side of things, because we're all a bit C++y and juicy.
I do some C++, but I didn't inhale. No, you're right.
Yeah, hi, I'm Nick Thompson. I write audio plugins as Creative Intent, and I'm here this year showing a project called Elementary Audio. I'm probably on the unconventional side of this panel as coming strongly from the JavaScript web world.
Yeah, we thought we should have someone vaguely JavaScripty and American. So
yeah.
I got the diversity right.
We did our best.
I'm Dave Rowland. I head up the engineering for Tracktion and Prism, and kind of mainly oversee the Tracktion engine and Waveform side of things. Okay, if everyone's got the QR code, if you weren't able to get it, you can go to menti.com and use this code on the right-hand side. Perhaps if you can get the QR code, take a quick photo of that. And then I'll go to the first topic, why people get voting on stuff.
Oh, things are moving already. This is actually working.
It's doing it in real
time. This is sweet. Well done.
Okay, so we will come back to that in a sec.
Really? Is that your first choice?
We'll come back to that in a sec, but we have a topic while people are voting. Obviously, the other thing that's great about this is the people watching online can also get involved and vote.
Or troll us.
So there's one more thing. So the first topic we're going to talk about is tabs versus spaces, but you can also vote on the outcome of the debate. So if you use the QR code in the corner, or you go to menti.com and type in that number, there'll be tabs or spaces, and you can vote on that. So hopefully we come up with some sort of consensus.
And yeah, I'm sure that won't be divisive at all, that one. And everyone will make the right choice, right?
Okay, so who wants to start with a comment on tabs or spaces? Perhaps, Jules, you wrote this code example.
Well, I put the code example. My pet hate on tabs versus spaces is when someone applies for a job and they send me the CV and they say, visit my GitHub, come and have a look at some amazing, useful code that shows how great I am as a programmer. And you go there and it's just like all over the screen. You know, this is like in the web page, viewing it on GitHub. It's just like they've mixed tabs and spaces. It's just a total mess. And it's like, well, bad first impression. And for me, that kind of sums up why there's only one right answer to this question. Does anyone disagree?
Do we have a
Tabs.
compelling argument here for tabs? I mean, I will say, because I'm the hardware person, I have to say this, that I come from an industry where the object code is still smaller than the source code. And so the source code represents a large portion of what you have to store and manipulate. And the only thing one can say in favor of tabs is it does make the source code smaller. And it does make your fiddling with the keyboard somewhat less involved. And you probably don't have to set up your editor to use spaces. I don't know if anybody else has any more compelling arguments in favor of tabs.
Make files.
Make files.
Well, more than make, they can do spaces. I mean, honestly, there is genuinely no point in being militant about this. It's silly to argue about it, and I'll kill you if you don't use spaces.
and I'll be there holding you down.
On Jules' point, I did find out last night, apparently you can use a URL from GitHub that will align things properly. I don't know if it works when it's mixed, but it will do the conversion for you. So perhaps that's one less pain point in your life.
But anyone who looks up that URL to send to someone should know that they've messed up their indentation, and they should just fix the code. So
Agreed.
Okay, so it's genuine pain point.
Yeah.
Like, so spaces, I prefer. Tabs, I see the argument. The thing I really hate is anyone who mixes it.
Oh,
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Is like nails down a chalkboard at that point. Yeah.
Tabs,
Yeah.
extra spaces.
Extra spaces?
Extra.
It's just, no, don't like it. Don't like it. I physically, that actually sort of produces a vomit reflex in me at that point.
What do people typically use in Webland, in CSS or JavaScript?
I think it's the same situation. Could be mixed. Could be tabs. Could be spaces. I
There's
have
2 spaces as well, isn't it?
I like 2 spaces. Yeah. I'm not a 4-space fan.
I can live with
You're the
spaces.
cause of all of our problems.
C++ dude who, read Biana's books, he flipped to using that proportional italic bold font for code listings. Now that's your one compelling argument for tabs, but then you're kind of like thinking, is it 2 spaces, a tab stop, or like 3.5? It's all a little bit magical at that point. But that is like, that's the one reason why you'd use tabs, which is because you're insane and using a font that no human being wants to recode it.
A non-proportional font.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to move on from there because I think we don't.
Should we see
talk
what
about that
the vote
anymore.
was?
So let's see what the result was.
Oh, well,
6.
okay.
I'm surprised.
lot of
it's
tabs.
that
Have we
bad. Lot of tabs.
recorded the net addresses of the 34%? We'll be coming around later to visit you guys.
Okay, so let's
With our
go
Twitter
back
mob.
to the poll and see what we're going to talk about next. Oh, it's tight at the
really?
top.
Oh, but that's...
Oh, number 1 object. I hope we got into this later on. But
Love it.
okay.
All right, fine. Well, it's a democracy.
So voting link on the right-hand side again. Hopefully everyone can see that. Does anyone want to kick us off? Does anyone? Right, you kick us off with functional because you gave a talk on that.
Yeah, I'm functional 100%. I mean, I'm not. I was having an interesting conversation with somebody yesterday here, and this might start a fire here, but I'm not convinced necessarily that object-oriented programming will even like persist in the history of computing. Like, I think that it could be. Hear me out. I think that it could be sort of like a moment in time in the history of computer science. And the future, and I'm talking about like distant future. This is not like next time, this time next year, object-oriented programming isn't going to be around. But I would be very interested to see like what the space of computer science looks like, 20, 30, 40 years from now. And I could imagine that object-oriented programming is like just a part of the timescale, like a part of the history.
Woo! That's a really fascinating
got a
take.
clap.
That's a genuinely fascinating take. So,
Yeah.
I mean, A, for this topic, why is it a versus? Because it's not. Which is why it's kind of almost disappointing to lead with this one, because you can't have a good fight about this one. I was really hoping that one of these things devolves into an arm wrestle. This is not it. It's really important as developers that we understand both paradigms, and it's not one or the other. And oftentimes, if you're writing something procedural, you want to flip back to that functional style because it allows you to be more expressive, and the good languages allow you to write in both ways. So it is a complementary thing, not an argument. The thing that I sort of observed that's really interesting is the functional style, that declarative style of programming, is increasingly seen and taking over and is getting mindshare because it is a really rich, expressive way of writing stuff. But it's sort of gradually appearing into the ecosystem of how we work. It's sort of like you just see things sort of swing more to that with a lot less ceremony. I remember when OO sort of came out, this is, you know, I'm an old fart, so there was the OO revolution and whole industry was born around it. And I remember the like stupidly expensive training courses you could go on and like, this will take over the world. And functional programming was like, yeah, I'll just sit here and just let you just write this one out. And then like, I'm here, we're good.
So,
yeah.
I was going to say, I'm with you on the hybrid type style. Most of what I do is object-oriented C++, but internally, a lot of things are in a functional style. It's not like functional, but, you know, writing things as pure function, passing in state. And the main benefit of that is it's incredibly testable. Your unit tests are just call this function with some state, what's the result?
Yeah.
So I use that kind of hybrid approach, particularly for things that are well tested. So we've spoken about a functional style, perhaps, in C++. Does anyone have any strong arguments for the more functional languages, like Haskell or Faust?
I'd be interested to kind of pose a question to you guys. And first, I think one of the reasons that I was having this conversation yesterday and having this thought process goes back to like trying to understand the history of why object-oriented programming, like why that kind of point in history occurred. Like, why is it that object-oriented programming really excelled at a certain point in history? And I was like, off the top of my head, I was kind of looking at Java maybe as the reason, because the Java platform was awesome. And Java promoted the idea of object-oriented programming. But I wonder, like, if you know, if a company had come along and written an amazing platform like that at that point in time with a functional language on top, would we have had an a functional kind of boom? And so if it was like a historical event that propagated object-oriented programming, then that's why I think like on this broader timescale, we might see, you know, it's not necessarily due to like the superiority of the model. Do you know what I mean?
It might be just an impulse that's kind of dampening down.
Yeah. And so that's the comment on the history of it, I guess.
As a spokesman, sorry, I'm not going to, I can interrupt you. But as a spokesman for the industry that never made the transition to object-oriented programming, I would suggest that you look to the world of the desktop interface for a reason why it became suddenly popular. And as the user interfaces we were using became more sophisticated, you had programs where multi-document support was a norm, and so you had these separate contexts open in the same application. Now, if you're passing pointers to structs around, as we still do, that's ferociously horrible in terms of managing memory and managing time. And so object-oriented languages was a really neat solution to that problem, where you just spawn another object, put it on a list, and that would be your whole new context.
Our time is just
We're out of time.
Yeah.
So let's check the results, see if people prefer object or function.
I was just going to say, I think the history behind it is that people just had this pent-up need to, they had their animal class and they couldn't derive dog and cat from it. And they were going, how do I do this? How do I represent this?
So, unfortunately, it's a big defeat for functional programming.
Let's take this poll again next year.
Yeah,
and
so
then
we do this
20 years
every
from
year
now, and then 40 years from now.
Like a Scottish referendum.
We'll get them one day.
Okay, so next biggest topic is write it yourself versus write a library, number one. Okay, let's dive into that. So, who here's written a library?
How many wheels have I reinvented?
Yes. So who wants to kick us off with that then? Well, I guess we could just talk through the example you've got there, Jules, which is a fairly trivial one, and you've got arguments for both sides of this, right?
I mean, I put that one down trying to think of a good example for not using a library, really. Because sometimes, you know, especially I'm sure Nick's got some stories from the whole web world where you just go, oh, I need to add two numbers, I'm going to pull in 3,000 NPM dependencies with random third-party code, and it just all arrives and you're using it all and you don't even see it. But I was trying to think of when you don't want to use one, and sometimes like snapping a pointer. Like I've written a function to do that countless times. To the point where I actually finally put one in my CHOP library, because it's a little library of things I'm sick of rewriting. I put them into a little library, completely free to use.
Of course, you did that yourself rather than find someone else.
Of course, so I'm the worst person to answer this because I do both. I write it myself, and it is a library.
So you, rather than use a library, write a new library?
That's the other. That's the option that's not on the voting, isn't it? Which is probably not the wisest one. But it's just like if you're just doing something really simple like that, it's not. The line above is more readable, but it's not a sin to just write it out if it's not too big.
So what are the pros? So let's try and summarize the pros for writing it yourself, in that you don't need to pull in loads of dependencies like you do in NPM or something like that.
And it'll be closer to what you actually want,
right?
Rather than trying to...
Are we talking for production code or for learning purposes? Because if you want to actually learn how to write a sample rate converter, don't use lib sample rate.
Yeah.
Do it yourself.
I think we're talking about.
But if you're doing production code, don't write a sample rate converter. Pull in a good library.
Yeah.
Well,
Right,
if you're doing
so
it for giggles, then none of this really applies. So I suppose we have to assume production code, or code that may one day be intended for production.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, we're all
so the other
We
argument
all
is
know every
writing it
prototype
yourself.
code always gets shipped anyway. So yeah.
If you depend on lots of stuff, then versioning and updating one or the other is particularly annoying when you work in a group. If you have a complex kind of dependency tree and someone goes, oh, I'm going to update that version, and then it breaks a ton of other stuff that other people have to pick up.
Oh my word, you're touching a raw nerve. So we just over the weekend had a Jenkins failure. We pulled in an MR and one of the branches failed because we do have a complex dependency tree. And something down there used, I don't know, libpd, which pulled in an FFT library. The new thing also pulled in. And of course, I think libpd slightly modifies that version of the library. And so the world explodes. But that sort of then makes me think about the other reason potentially for re-implementing, which is if the library that you want to use, which is well tested, you can see the code, it's awesome, but it's got a GPL license, and I'm writing a proprietary thing, I can't pull that in.
Yeah.
Got to write it myself.
Yep.
True. Ben, have you got an opinion on this, or
Well,
do you normally write everything from scratch?
Well, in a really constrained system, you want to use something with a few hours of test coverage that somebody else has paid for. I will say this specifically. At one stage, the head tracker had about 150 bytes free. I had to write my own floating point and fixed point arithmetic handler because nothing I could put in would be that compact. And yeah, it's horrible, and sometimes you have to do it. So if you're working in a really constrained system, you often have no choice but to roll your own and regret it forevermore.
Yeah.
And then you ship a hardware product with a small bug because you forgot to put a U in or something like that.
Oh, there was a bug in square root for months. It took me a little while to find.
Yeah.
I mean, there are weird edge cases like we had for Sol when we wrote our own array vector class, and that's a stupid thing to do because we've got stud vector, which is very good, but we needed one that would assert if it went out of range. And okay, well, just write one. And then it's not like we could just go and find one of those and pull it in. So sometimes you end up doing things for practical reasons on your own.
Okay.
So,
Well, the
Any
other
more
thing
on
would be,
that?
though, if you, if you think there's a library for this particular facility, and then you go out and you search GitHub, and there are 3,000 versions of random libraries. Now, again, this is if it's not something that's so fixed, okay, we just use this library, that's the industry standard. Now, do you want to shop around 40 different random libraries from graduates and random stuff and with no sort of prior art? Or would you trust one of those, or are you going to
You
do it
trust the
again
one
yourself?
that compares itself to all the others and adds benchmarks in the repo. That's what I tend to do anyway.
time's up.
Time's up.
I would add one quick thing, which is, I mean, typically my stance is use a library if there's a well-suited library out there. One argument against using a library that I don't think has come up yet is basically like sometimes you're looking for something that can do a job for you, and you reach for it when like it seems to get that job done. But there's a trade-off involved as long as that library like offers an API that you may continue using once it's in your repository. And if that API is not sufficiently well designed for like the longevity of your product. And so the reason I bring that up is because I think it's really hard to recover from the wrong abstraction early on in your product lifetime. And so if you're looking for a small thing and you find a library that does it, and then you end up leaning on that library and leaning on some abstractions that you got for free and maybe weren't thought all the way through, that could be really painful long term. So in the long term, it maybe would have been better to just write that one small thing that you needed, which is that's a really hard thing to evaluate early on. But
Of course, it would have been easier to adapt if you're writing OO code.
I very strongly disagree with that.
Okay, so what have people said? Write it yourself, 16%. Oh, that's not percentage, that's votes, is it? But the majority say use a library.
You see, we should have had it depends.
It depends.
Well, I think
That's the answer to every question.
I don't want to
That
give
is-
the end away. Okay, let's
what's
see what's up next. We've done object-oriented submodules versus monolithic repos.
Oh, God.
That's good.
Next question,
Yeah.
please.
Spiders walking over my grave.
Can't see the number.
Can't see the number. It's 7, maybe.
Can anyone work it
It
out?
must be 7. Go on, quick. Where's the one?
There.
There we go.
Okay, so who wants to kick us off? You got a preference? You've got a big organisation with lots of stuff. How do you do it?
Okay, so we have so much baggage and history of this. We've had projects that started as a mono repo get rather complicated. We've got projects coming out of our ears, right? They split into many submodules to help sort of make things more fluid, and that has caused so much maintenance burden because submodules then contain submodules that contain submodules that to get any piece of code through is 15 MRs of cascading complexity, and you can't get that in your head. So they've pulled back into single mono repos. There is a massive it depends here, and all I can say is it's pain either way, basically. But the aggregate pain, I don't like this answer, but we've discovered that the aggregate pain is having fewer repositories. And you know, the Google's famously has this huge mono repo. And I don't know how they make that work, but I'm beginning to sort of see why they went that way.
That was my quote that Titus Winters has said is, it's the only thing that scales to use a mono repo because if everyone is using the same code, then they know if they break something for everybody else. Of course, this is Google, so they have buildings worth of CI machines, and they write tools if they change something that will just change everybody's code.
I can whinge, but like by me a bit, I can whinge on some of the things that really frustrate me with submodules, even though they are really powerful.
Yeah.
So this is specifically Git because
That's what everybody uses.
Use a really horrible and incomprehensible tool, OBS. But any submodule of any reasonable size, if you check out a repository, it gives you a percentage. Cool, I see how this repository, the bytes are coming at me, and then you submodule update in there, recursive obviously, and then you just sit there whilst an unknowable amount of data comes at you. There was a submodule that, blame our infrastructure, but it took about 2 hours to come down, and I've got no idea if anything was happening or not. So that sucks in Git. And then the other thing is, I love using work trees. If you don't know Git work trees, they're great. So rather than having to switch branches the whole time, you can just create another little repo to the side. And again, if you have these, some of our submodules are contents, they are quite large, right? And of course, then if you go into another work tree, you then have to reclone the whole submodule again. It's like, why? Gods of Git, did you do this thing? So submodules bring more pain, I will say that.
Okay.
Ben, do you use source control?
Well, I use _final in my file name, just like everybody else. No, because I'm generally quite solo and I don't need to branch very much. I use SVN quite a lot. It's less fiddly, but SVN extern and Git submodule are pretty much the same, and the same horror applies no matter what you're using. It would appear that it's just the paradigm is broken, and that's a real cliche to say at a panel, but neither Git submodule nor SVN extern are the right way of bringing code together, and maybe there should be a sort of separate single-level construct that just manages that stuff for you.
And now, is it write a library or do it yourself?
Well, I don't trust Linus Torvalds to solve that problem for me, but I'm not going to do it myself.
So, Nick, what size people are you interacting with normally on projects? Is it just you, or?
Well, I mean, I've worked
What
at...
size people? That's a bit personal.
I don't know. I've worked on solo projects, and I've worked at, huge companies. I think typically I prefer the mono repo, but I might argue for writing your code as if it could be split out into a bunch of repos, right? Like the interdependency, just because it's like near at hand inside a mono repo does not mean that you should like totally clutter your dependency tree.
That's the other problem, yeah.
That's probably how I would do it.
Yeah, just to kind of finish up, the way that we tend to do it is we have a bunch of submodules, but we only go one level deep. So if you clone a repo and you don't do a recursive submodule, it should all build. That doesn't necessarily get away of the problem if someone updates JUCE because it has a dependency on something that builds further down, then it cascades through again. But it's kind of slightly less pain than sitting there going, well, how many submodules is it pulling in? Okay, let's see what people thought on this.
Mono repos?
Pretty close.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
interesting.
Quite balanced, yeah.
So people tending towards monolithic repos. Yeah. Be interesting to see what size monolithic repos they are.
I think this is proving you're generally well-adjusted people.
It's a fairly narrow margin, though. You wouldn't want to leave the European Union over a margin like that, would you?
Okay, so now we're going to get into some contention, I think.
Oh,
here.
oh right, okay.
Big one, the one people have been waiting for.
I don't know which way this is going to
Okay, so we all write in C++ here.
Yeah.
Has anyone done any Rust?
A little bit.
Okay, kick us off. What's amazing about Rust? Why should people use it over
Why
C++?
should we rewrite all our libraries in it?
Cargo, for one.
Yeah.
I mean, Cargo is fantastic, and I think I had an interesting conversation about this yesterday here as well. I think Cargo exists in Rust because the language allows it to exist. I think the language of C++ prevents the introduction of tooling as complete and efficient as Cargo. And I think like it's had enough time to kind of figure that out if the language would have allowed it, right? So I think the language of Rust allows for Cargo to show up in the ecosystem. I think that's a fantastic tool. I could go on about type systems. I prefer Rust's type system as well, but I'll start there.
Okay.
Build tools.
Just, I'll give really quick thoughts on Rust. I originally really liked Rust because it's a very terse syntax. You can declare variables with 3 letters, things like that. I like the way they do exceptions, and they have some nice ideas about stuff. But seeing the way C++ is going, it's adding in and it's becoming a better and better language. So I think they're not so different anymore. And of course, with C++, you get the decades of history and the libraries and things to do.
All of that bad stuff. Inside C++, there's an awesome language really trying to stay hidden. Yeah.
I think Herb Sutter's trying to get it out.
So I love C++, which is perverse, and that's why I'm allowed to be rude to it. It's sort of like my kids or something. But so they're not here and they're not going to listen, so I'm fine with that comment. So Rust is an awesome language. It's really interesting, and it's, again, the safety, the tooling around it. This is stuff that C++ definitely doesn't have. But I think almost everyone in this room will probably be a C++ programmer. That's the interesting thing. It's almost C++ versus anything else in our industry. It's momentum, isn't it? So I've dabbled with Rust a bit. Well, why have I only dabbled with Rust? Because day to day, everything I'm doing is still in C++. And there is an interop story, but it's still, what's it going to take to actually push us, to reduce the friction? And we're not just in this C++ momentum. And the fact that C++, it had a fallow period where just nothing happened, and now it's very exciting. It's also silly watching the committee bun fights about features that never quite get through. But the language is evolving and it is growing, and that's exciting. Is it doing it fast enough? No, but we're all using it because it's what we use. So I kind of think it doesn't really matter at this point in time. Unless something fundamental happens and apocalyptic and C++ just disappears, it's C++ for us because that's what we do. And it's not a good answer, but it's how you're going to keep job security. It's how you're going to keep the code going. So
So Rust was sort of created by Mozilla to write the web browser, basically. On the other end of the scale, when you have embedded or small devices, I guess you're probably writing a lot of your own code, and is Rust an option in that space?
It is, and people are using it, but it's an option in the same way that C++ is an option.
Yeah.
That if you're doing integration for money, generally, you want we want a language that's quite close to the level of abstraction that assembly language gives you. And so it doesn't necessarily make sense to start using a tool like Rust or C++. We're still having the argument of C versus BASIC in some quarters of the embedded world. I mean, I'm surprised we're even having that debate.
So, Jules, do you think Rust is going to take over eventually, like his object-oriented blip, or?
They're going to be functional versus Rust. They're going to be fighting it out as the planet boils and sees. I don't know. I kind of look sadly at Rust, going, it looks really nice, and like you say, it's great, really well thought out, great tooling, and then I'm going to start a new project, and I go, well, C++, and it's like you say, it's just where we are, and we're out of time, but I feel like I could really make the effort and use Rust, but I don't know what it is. Something's stopping me.
But you're almost the anti-hero for this, because you're one of the few people that's introduced a new language. So you have a perspective.
That's true, but I'm not trying to compete with C++.
Sure, yeah.
But
I think that's the answer.
Yeah.
Complementary.
Okay, so well, the answer actually is.
Oh, wow.
Only 20% of people
job done.
think Rust is the future.
Ask this one as well in 5 years.
So we're going to keep a record of this and keep going back to it. Okay, next question. Header only versus header or inline?
Oh, yeah.
Anyone got any strong opinions on this? Whether you
the
write...
tooling, C++ means it's much easier and much nicer experience of a header-only library, because then you don't have all this dependency nonsense. And of course, then you have incredibly insane compile times instead. We're using the wrong language!
Okay, so I didn't want to dive off into this direction too early, but it doesn't sound anyone's too enthusiastic about talking about this. But do you think C++ modules, which are come in, will make this a thing of the past completely? You can write them in 2 files, but will people just write them in one anyway?
That completely takes from everything I've seen, it completely takes the problem away. And I can't remember what I was listening, it was a CPP cast or something, when they were saying that they have discovered that putting the entire standard library in a single module rather than splitting up is massively faster to compile. And these things seem like I can't wait for the future. And I hope they finally manage to standardize that one without too many arguments.
Well, yeah, that'd be interesting. But yeah, because you end up with one lookup table for all the things rather than many. Yeah. Any other? So what have we got up here? We've got, if it's header only, 0 build steps, you kind of alluded to that. All your code is in one place so you can see it all. But you get long
all the answers behind us.
Well, these are talking points. We're sort of struggling for things to say.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my approach to this is, when I'm writing a class, I'll do it header only, and then it'll get bigger and bigger, and at some point I go,
I'm writing Java.
Yeah, or Rust, and then you split it up into, as soon as it starts getting, you're bored waiting for the compile, you go, okay, right.
What about the style where you declare your header file and then you write everything as inline at the bottom?
I've been doing that for public code, where I kind of have a header-only library where all the interesting bits that you want to look at, like in a normal header file, are at the top. And so anyone coming and reading this file will see that. And then there's a big comment saying, don't ignore anything that follows here, and then you put all of the inline declarations below. And that's quite a nice, it means you get the header-only ease of use, but it still makes it as readable as a...
And it probably transitions to modules eventually.
That's the idea. Then you sort of move that into the module and you're good.
That's about readability, and that's the problem I often have with code that's written in that Java style. I just want to glance through if it's a class declaration, forgive me. But I want to see what the code does.
Exactly.
And if you've got to go through the implementation, that's really unpleasant.
But at the same time, quite often the header is actually easier to read. If you've got a lot of one-liner functions, it's often just easier to stick them at the right-hand side there, rather than have them, so you can just glance at, that just returns the member variables.
It's a readability trade-off there with how big your definitions are.
So if you can keep it compact, then great, put it in line. But if it's going to be splurging down the page, then split it up and hide it.
A whole load of these things are about code should be humane. We often say that you should write for humans to read, not the compiler. And again, now we've got this, it's a pointless sort of divide, really, and it's not one you can have a meaningful, should it be this way or that way? You just need to write code that is first able to be maintained and read and understood and contributed to. And as you're discussing that, we are literally, it's so painful. It's the wrong language. We are making concessions to make the tooling work. The compile time needs to be fast, or the build systems are horrible. And you're contorting yourself by putting some code down here, and then if you change the function space, you've got to edit it in 3 places. And why are we doing this to ourselves? It's how we make money.
We get paid to do it. So if we could do it all easily, we'd be out of a job.
Yeah.
What about
Write
places
another
where
language with better header file system.
What about places where you have to use a CPP file to abstract something away, like platform-specific code?
Yeah, to
or...
keep third-party code contained, and you just have to do it.
There's places where you kind of struggle to get away from it, but less and less so, I seem, these days.
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, you're forced to use the pimple idiom to hide something that's going to be.
Yeah.
And again, that feels like by now that's something we should have encoded into the language in a more humane way again, rather than having it a million manual implementations of a pimple idiom class. We're not grown up now.
Okay, should we call that one there?
Yeah.
And
What do we get?
oh,
Wow, really?
that's a big. That was not what I was expecting.
Surprising.
I thought it'd be mostly header.
Surprising.
Okay.
Rewrite
Much
everything.
Gosh, okay.
Okay,
Back to the drawing board.
we were wrong. What have we got? Camel case versus snake case. This is another style-based one. Who wants to have at it? Do you have a company style, or do you have a million different styles?
Again, it's one of those things that turns into a real pain point for me. There's various code bases we have. So we use JUCE, and we love using JUCE, and we use the standard library because we love using the standard library. And we have a coding convention on some of the projects that's different from both. Why we chose to do this, I don't know. But once a project gets to a certain size, there's no way you're changing this kind of thing. And I hate that level of inconsistency. There are some interesting aspects that come out of this, and I do not recommend it. But it's very clear if you're using a standard library function facility, because it's
a standard library name.
It's function one way, and if I'm using JUCE, it's kind of camel case like that, and if we're using ours, it's more C#. But so, or it reveals historical strata. But none of these are good things, and please don't do what we did.
Nick, have you got a preference for style? Or?
Yeah, I mean, my preference is camel case, but I feel similarly to this one, how I feel about tabs and spaces. Like, I don't really care, just be consistent.
See, I was very strongly this style years ago, and using more and more of the standard library, I've just come to accept that. I do like the thing that you can tell if stuff's standard library or not, but I've kind of been taking that one step further, and when I write stuff that I very much want to be library, I sometimes write it in camel case, snake case, because it sort of just says something different in the code. And I'm not sure if that pains me more than it doesn't at the moment. I haven't made this decision.
I know what you mean. I'm writing a new class and I sort of hover over it going, oh, which way to go?
Yeah, which side of the line?
I usually land on camel case, but I'm more and more. One day it's gonna be a snake case moment. I mean, the reason that we're all sitting in this room and we're all doing that is my fault, and I copied that in JUCE from Java, so it's Java's fault really, because that seemed that because when I created JUCE, Java was still cool. And
it seems like Java's got a lot to answer for.
Yeah, cool. It's object orientation. It's that style of. My one thing, the one thing I do like about that is the uppercase types and lowercase values. I think that's really helpful.
Having a thing that declares itself like that, my class, just looks a bit weird to me.
And is it Go where you have? There's some language where it's. What did someone say what it was? The way you
wouldn't call it that. You wouldn't say my class.
Yeah, but there is some language where the case actually is part of the syntax.
Yeah, Rust.
Rust does it have to do?
Oh, it's not just a style thing. It's actually a syntax thing.
Yeah.
Oh, well, good for them.
Another win for us then.
Yeah.
Ben, any final thoughts before we move on?
Can I get a shout out for Hungarian notation?
This could be the arm wrestle.
I was playing devil's advocate.
Other options are there, but if you use them, you will be fine. Okay, let's see.
Actually, I just thought on the last one, what we should have added to that is the bracing style. Allman, or... that would have been...
Just not GNU, anything but GNU.
It seems like people prefer camel case, but probably because a lot of them are JUCE users, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
You go with what
A lot
you know.
of Java users.
Yeah. Java. Okay. Locks versus lock-free we're on next. Anyone want to go?
It's not really a yes or no.
I mean,
it's not a yes or no, but a lot of these are contrived
It's more a
talking points.
tutorial than an argument.
I mean, lock-free, really interesting to write your own lock-free arguments. It's a really educational thing. Never, ever do it in production code.
No.
Unless you are a genius level. I've done a whole load of that kind of stuff to try to eke the last bit of performance out of an embedded platform, and I know my code was flawed. And I'm bloody marvelous. So yeah, it's like it's lock-free or not. It's use a library. That's the answer.
Use a good library.
Although they've probably also got it wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, notoriously there are like lock-free algorithm libraries out there that have been in thousands of production bits of software running for decades, and then someone finds a bug in it.
Yeah. I've done that. I've used a third-party lock-free, double-ended, multi-produce, multi-consumer queue. And I kept hitting this weird test failure occasionally. And then I swapped to another one, which is actually Fabian's one. And the bug went away. So, bugs are out there.
Yeah. Oh, hang on, we have a question from the audience.
The right-hand side isn't lock-free.
The right-hand side isn't lock-free. Dave wrote this.
It's very, very hard to write lock-free code.
Yeah, you see, even one line, you have a bug.
The trouble is you've got too many threads on your processor.
Just do it in interrupts, eh?
Yeah, well, interrupts are similar to thread-safe problems, but usually a FIFO is the only tool you need. It's your hammer to get out of that.
And again, we're asking the wrong question because we're doing this the wrong way. If we had the infrastructure that took that away from us, it wouldn't be a question and everything would be performant because we had provably performant systems we're building on top of. So yeah.
That's the right answer.
So here's, I guess, a more contentious point then. Perhaps you kind of alluded to it, I don't know, or not. If you know that the right way on real-time threads is to write everything atomically, but then you use something else like that has a lock or a signaling mechanism or something, and it's faster, do you go with that because the performance is better, or are you very much aware that it might be slightly longer and cause a dropout at some point? Do you trust or not?
I mean, if
Do you want to put a time bomb in your code and store up a problem for yourself in the future?
it depends what the time bomb's going to do. If you look at it and you go, well, one time in a billion, someone's going to be like playing their synthesizer and it's going to go.
Well, if it does it on stage at the Albert Hall or
Well, no one will
Wembley
know
or
who it
something.
was, and they will never be able to. No one can
We're
ever.
looking at the orchestra going, what's going on there?
They can never trace it back to you. So
My life has been a lie.
What about times where you don't necessarily know how much you're bound? So in a DAW, for example, people add loads of plugins, and a synth might be taking no resources. Suddenly someone hammers on the keys, and it spikes. So you can't control that, so there's a possibility that it will anyway. The situation I'm thinking of is our multi-threaded graph rendering. So you can have a machine with 16 threads and they can go off. I have an algorithm that does it completely lock-free, but you have to do a lot of busy waiting, so it burns the CPU. And people don't like that. So I thought, what does one with a condition variable that they all sit on a signal? And it works so much better. But occasionally, I guess it might click, but on a desktop environment, I've not seen it yet. Yeah. But you have other risks of people, playing too many keys and it dropping out.
it might just sound jazzy.
Well, I think that's interesting as well because the granularity you're talking at. I mean, if that's like a scatter-gather, just a buffer audio processing thing, then that's a very different amount of intention than something like every sample within the audio loop or something.
Yeah. So you're saying it does matter?
It depends. Pick your battles, yeah.
Okay, move on from that one.
And to be honest, we're probably starting to run out of time overall.
Yeah, how
we've
much
been
have we
doing
got?
45 minutes. Yeah, so how many more have we got?
We've got 5 minutes left, haven't we?
Let's do
A
another.
minute per question.
Everyone, right, so let's do a real quick fire. Main dev platform.
Yeah, what's your platform?
Should we just do a poll? That's probably the easiest thing here.
Yeah.
Who uses macOS as the main dev platform?
Dev deploy or
Just what's your desktop machine?
okay.
What do you type on when you're
Okay.
writing code? Yeah.
Mac.
Okay, pretty Mac-y.
Okay.
Okay, Linux.
In the audience?
Proud hands.
Emacs hands.
With RSI.
Windows?
So the rest of you must be Windows, probably. Yeah. Yeah.
You're a Windows
That's pretty underrepresented.
Well, you can't do embedded development in anything else, really.
Yeah.
Right.
All the dev tools are Windows,
Yeah.
mostly Windows only.
Other?
What's the other?
Any others? There won't be any others. Others is Linux, isn't it? So unless there's a BSD and sort of
Bios.
Bios. Plan 9.
Okay. Well, I mean, it might be interesting to see what people come out with.
That feels about
Yeah,
right.
we're
Yeah, I
largely in
mean,
the
I guess
Mac.
if we were at a
about
different
right.
kind of conference for networking or something, Mac wouldn't be quite so heavily over.
It's very much a music
skewed.
industry thing.
Yeah.
Okay, next one. Exceptions versus return values. What number are we on? Can you see the number down?
9.
Oh, it's 9, right. There you go. 9. Yeah, preferences for error handling.
Yeah. Depends, doesn't it? Really. I mean, I've got code where it would just a nightmare not to use exceptions, but it would be faster not to use exceptions. So it's always a bit of a trade-off.
You're doing it wrong. Don't have any errors.
No errors,
No.
that's the answer. One thing I would say is I used to really dislike exceptions when I was new to programming because the syntax and kind of jumping out stuff feels a bit weird, but I'm much happier with them now. So I don't know whether it's is it just that you get bombarded with a lot of syntax and language stuff and it takes time to know what it all does?
The one thing about exceptions, though, is only allow them if you know you can trust everyone in your team not to screw it up. Because
unhandled exceptions.
You've got to have. It's only adults should be able to use exceptions, really.
Are we using the right language, Jules?
Oh, I don't know. Rust probably has some even more amazing way of doing this stuff.
They've got good syntax for handling exceptions.
I mean,
which may or may not be coming in C++.
Whatever
in the
happened
next
to
10
was it
years.
Herb Sutter's cost
Herb section.
Herb sections,
His
yeah.
cheap exception thing. Yeah.
I think he generally comes up with ideas like, this is how we solve one of these pain points, and then kind of floats it, and then it sits there until it might gain some consensus or not.
And waits till Timo gets on with it or something.
Yeah. Okay, let's...
That's a
Yeah,
sensible,
it's kind of
that's a
even.
sensible result.
Again,
Yeah.
how many minutes have we got left?
Well, I don't know. I mean, until
literally
people
up.
start to leave, really.
Because, so I did want to kind of round this off with, obviously these are trivial verses because everything does depend. And I think the point was to have topics of discussion and realize that it's okay to kind of talk about things and just to accept someone else has a different perspective or a different, perhaps, learning path. And, not everything has to be a heated argument. And perhaps there's things on here you should talk about with people at the conference.
Yeah, and punch them a little less hard when they use tabs. See
No,
that?
that's
see
still
that?
acceptable.
Any final thoughts from anyone? Any topics up there that we didn't get to that perhaps would be interesting? Ball function parameters versus enums.
East cons versus west cons was a good one.
East cons versus cont west.
Number
Const west.
Yeah.
Const
Let's
west.
have a quick vote on that, shall
Yeah,
we?
that would be fun. I don't know if
to
everyone
see-
actually is aware of what this is. But
Yeah, so East cons versus const west. East const is the style where you have your thing and then const, and const west is const and then the type. And if you prefer them at all. Oh, can't hear me. Well, it says it on the
Time's
slide.
up, clearly.
Wrong
Um,
language.
Yeah, was it John Calb, I think,
Yep.
had this statement, which is const modifies what is on its left unless there is nothing on its left, in which case it modifies what's on its right. And he said, well, if you only ever use const west, const modifies what is on its left. Is that right?
no, you've got it.
I've got it the wrong way around, haven't I?
It's not confusing at all.
You're using the wrong language.
That's exactly what I said.
Well, East cons makes total sense, but I use cons west because
Yeah.
it's because
Bridge.
in English you put the adjective before the noun.
Yeah,
and
you're
I
using the
can't- I
wrong
don't
language,
think
that's
other
the
way
problem.
around.
Hash define.
You were using the wrong language.
Hash defines the answer.
Hash define, yeah.
Yeah. Get the preprocessor to store it for you.
Or what's const.
In fact, that's another argument for Rust.
I mean,
because they
surely
have
these
left,
days
don't
it's
they?
Yeah.
East
Yeah.
const expa or West const expa anyway.
Yes, especially if you're in embedded land. Okay, I think we're out of time.
We should, yeah.
So we should probably
We
call
should
it
probably
there.
go away. Should we ask for questions if anyone's got any?
Yeah, I don't know if there are any questions about like talking points or just feedback in
Yeah,
general, or
thoughts?
did you enjoy it? Should we do this again, or was it a waste of everybody's time?
Yeah, that kind of thing. We should have had a poll for that. shouldn't we?
Let's have a poll. Hands up
Scoffing
for
it on
they had
stage.
fun. Now the bad one. Hands up for anyone who didn't like this kind of
Oh
format.
yeah, come on, come on. Yeah, okay. Let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah, I like it. They're tabbers.
Okay. Are there any individual questions or things people want to say, or do we want to get some? Is it lunch, or we got another session?
We do have another session.
Yeah.
Is that,
Oh, there's online questions,
online
are there?
questions.
I would do a whole another session just on OO versus functional.
Okay, well
You
maybe
know, we should call that
propose
imperative
next year.
versus functional, shouldn't we? Really? That would have been a closer match.
Stay tuned for ADC22.
I tend to think
just
of
a little
like
cliffhanger there.
classic animal, cat, dog example with object-oriented and things that have their state.
Yeah.
Mutable versus immutable.
Immutable.
Data structures, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one for next time.
Yeah, we can't get into that now.
Yeah, C got wrong.
Yeah.
The default should be immutable.
I do agree
yeah.
the
Opt
default.
into mutability.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they're all-
and that
You're
links into
using the wrong
functional
language.
style.
Yeah.
Another
thanks,
thing Russ
thanks,
says.
I like this theme.
Question over here.
I got one for you
Still
guys.
gonna punch you.
Wait, so all you Mac users are using Xcode for C++ development?
Oh, that was we should have had the IDs up there.
Mostly.
Actually, we had an IDs.
There is an IDs question we
Yeah.
didn't get to yet. But
Yeah, I feel like is it Stockholm syndrome where you kind of you fall in love with your captor. I'm sort of trapped in Xcode and I hate it, but I use it
Pretty
every
similar.
day, all day.
I'm sorry.
C-line.
I've tried C-Line.
Get me an NFR.
I've tried to go to C-Line so many times, and I'm like, right, I'm going to do it for 3 days, and then that'll be enough to get rid of all the pain points. And I just keep going back to Xcode, mainly because of the way it handles Windows. But I'm going to talk to Timor. And they're going to add it all just for me.
Do you guys VS Code is moved to that. I gave up on Xcode. It got really annoying. VS Code all the way.
I am using more VS Code these days.
Yeah.
Do you guys use, when you're editing in Xcode, do you actually edit in Xcode?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
When they took away the Vim mode, that did it for me. And now I'll get my code.
I use Vim at the terminal, and then I just pop over to Xcode when I need to compile.
I have program shame that I never learned Vim or Emacs.
No.
And I know I should
It's
one
worth
day.
it. It's worth
Right, old men down the pub. I think we're pretty done, right?
Emacs versus Vim.
I think
would
so.
be a good one,
The
too.
come away from today is that in 20 years, everyone's going to be using functional Rust.
In Vim.
In Vim. Thanks, everyone.
There we go.